This is Intervention TV, a business podcast. We focus on business and organization interventions, as well as learning and development interventions. If these topics are important to you, subscribe and like to join our community. And welcome to Intervention TV, Camisha Mills. Camisha is a fellow student in the DODC program at Bowling Green State University, and we are having a great time together.
As always.
Talk to us about yourself, Camisha, real quick.
Thank you for having me here, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I am a seasoned corporate worker. I've worked in my job for 22 years in corporate America, doing various supply chain, corporate tax, and now procurement. And I am a mom, a grandma of two, and living here in the exciting Research Triangle Park, Chapel Hill, Durham, Raleigh.
Well, that's awesome. So one area of focus that you have researched and looked into is emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So I think that's probably going to be most of what we talk about today, and especially emotional intelligence in organizations, in businesses. And so I want to start off and ask, how would you define emotional intelligence in a way that would make business leaders, in particular, really excited about it?
So for me, the topic is one that I will say I've had to get a grasp on myself. And I think emotional intelligence, maybe not even knowing the word of what it was, um, really helped develop me through a lot of situations through my career and through my education. I will say that emotional intelligence, it doesn't develop in isolation. And I would say also at its core, it starts with a deep self-awareness.
What do you mean develop in isolation?
So when you think about emotional intelligence, you have to think of the person as a whole. So their systems, their experiences, and the way that they, develop intentionally by design through that.
Okay. And then you were talking about self-awareness. How does that piece fit into emotional intelligence?
I mean, you just really have to sometimes take a step back and think, if something is continuing to happen to you or happen around you and there's a theme, sometimes you have to just take that look at yourself and say, is it something I'm doing? So be aware of your patterns, what you're putting out into the atmosphere, and how it's responding to you. And I think EQ, or emotional intelligence, lets us know that, because we're getting the same response. So at some point, you just have to realize and recognize that, hey, it starts with myself at its core. It is developmental, right? It's not a one size fits all or all in one. And now I'm emotionally intelligent. I think there's stages, so that self awareness really comes to play with building onto your emotional intelligence.
Okay, yeah, I think we've all worked for people that didn't have much self-awareness, so that makes a
Mm-hmm.
lot of sense. So maybe let's talk about that. When it comes to leadership and leadership behaviors, when you picture a leader that has high emotional intelligence, what kind of behaviors, what kind of attitudes is part of that vision?
I don't position it as a soft. I position it as more of a strategic motion, and its ability really to react and read and respond to dynamics in uh, real time. And so that means you and others. So you're looking both ways, and it drives your better decisions, stronger relationships, and also more sustainable outcomes for you and the business. So you and the leaders in the business. And I will say for emotional intelligence, leaders, in a way that they can leverage that is reducing friction in the teams, executing change, and then also getting results with the people.
Okay, yeah, that's sometimes hard to do. right? Getting people on board and doing that kind of thing with them. And so having that
Hmm.
emotional piece in place up
Yes.
front really makes a strong difference. Okay, so we like to talk about ourselves as though we balance the scholar and the practitioner effectively. So my next question is maybe a little bit more scholar oriented, but
Okay.
this is a subjective idea, right? And maybe it's kind of hard to put into numbers. So how do we measure emotional intelligence, and how effective or how reflective of the actual reality do you think that those measurement techniques are?
I think you're right there, and it feels subjective, right? But it actually is measuring patterns and not the emotions themselves, right? So, like I mentioned, being self awareness, being able to self regulate, social awareness, those cues that we get. So, can you read a room across cultures and contexts? So, there I go, bringing in cultural sort of intelligence because that's my thing. And then relational effectiveness. Do you trust people to follow you and to engage with you? Um, what does that look like, and what tools might we use? So, 360 assessments, we talked about that a lot in our last residency. The feedback loops, right? Behavioral observations. And then again, I think the feedback loops is the biggest one, especially in our DODC score. It comes across more consistently in those systems.
All right, so we're measuring the behaviors and the patterns, not the so it's the external things that we're really looking at, not the internal things.
Correct. Like I say, it's not that it feels subjective, but it's more the patterns that we get into and that we can see, and not the actual emotions themselves
Okay,
with with emotional intelligence.
it's observational.
Totally observational. And I think measuring that, um, pausing before you're reacting. I mean, those are some. I'm sorry. Those are some of the behaviors you can exhibit, I would say. But just thinking about it, you're not actually measuring the actual emotion of emotional intelligence. It can't be measured. You can't measure your emotions, but you can measure the patterns, I would say. So I
Okay,
keep doing this or I keep saying that. And that's how it shows up.
that helps the whole idea make a lot more sense to me. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So when I'm looking at in investing in an emotional intelligence program or something like that, I need to see a return on investment, right? I need to make sure
Absolutely.
that I'm I'm putting my time, my energy, my money into something that's going to give me something back, right?
Hmm.
And so, what business problems are organizations trying to address through emotional intelligence programs? What kind of behaviors do we associate with individuals that have low emotional intelligence?
I'm gonna say low emotional intelligence, maybe passive aggressive behavior, not being a team player, liking to work on an island, um, controlling, protecting information, so not willing to share, not willing to. Basically creating derailments for people on your team, um, poor cross-functional collaboration, not, just not being a team player, not willing to go the extra mile for the team. When I think about it, and I've been on teams um, where, one or two, or even myself, may have emotional intelligence and thinking that, in my mind, the system that I use is the right system. That's not always the truth, right? So I think having a dynamic instead of a static mindset will just get you a higher level of EQ, if that makes sense.
Okay, okay. So that your what do you say, that dynamic internal environment is going to allow you to self-reflect, to
Hmm.
identify gaps, to determine where you can improve.
Yes.
And then that's going to create, I think, what you're saying is a dynamic external environment where now my interactions with you are going to change for the better. My interactions with my superiors are going to change for the better.
Yeah, I will say, and I think it also shows up as being defensive. So if someone is speaking to you, you're defensive, you're reacting defensively, you're avoiding those hard conversations. So, you're not understanding or even giving space to understand a different perspective than your own. That shows it over reliance on authority versus influence, right? So in my world, that's what I mean when I say I'm on an island, right? I'm on this island. I control everything on this island, and I don't need, you know, um, collaboration. My influence is enough to get me to the next stage. And just a moment of transparency, I feel like I operated out of that influence over authority a lot of times. Just think I've been in this company 20 plus years. And a lot of times I mean, I know a lot of people, right? I've been in a lot of roles. I've um, worked across the board with tens of people, and I used to think that that influence could carry me over authority. And I learned landscape and knew, like, yeah, that's not how this works, right? You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy. And so I really had to, and it goes back to what we originally talked about, like self awareness and just being self aware and how am I showing up. So I think emotional intelligence, EQ, really starts with being self aware and what's happening around you. I think that's how you really get it because people start shutting doors or not listening to your ideas or placating you. Um, and even though you may be bright and you have great ideas and you offer something that we talk about ageism, right? And you talk about being in a place and a role, and that doesn't always equal emotional intelligence. Like
Okay, so let's come back to return on investment then. Um,
ROI.
right, right. So we've kind of talked about individuals with low versus high, and so
Mhm.
what is it that corporations or organizations are getting out of investing in EQ programs?
I think they're trying to solve, and what they're getting is toxic work culture. Not, people not being psychologically safe. I think that's a theme in our cohort. And I know later we'll talk about how psychological safety, emotional intelligence kind of come together. There's also one more. But I think poor cross functional collaboration, high turnover, that burnout culture, and then also leadership derailment, right? So, not opportunities for development, or having, a sort of star player on the team that gets the projects or gets the promotion or the opportunities to travel or to develop, right? There's always that one star player. And I think organizations, when you look at organizations with high EQ, it's total opposite, right? So, in our project right now that we're doing for talent development, we're talking about asset versus deficit and how that looks asset based um, deficiencies in, I'm sorry, asset based talent development versus asset deficient based talent development and what that looks like. And this is question, it really feels like that's what organizations are trying to solve, or even just in our cohort at this time, what we're looking at. And I think on one side, we talked about DDO, so deliberately developed organizations, so versus not, right? And what that looks like. And for me, emotional intelligence plays into like a DDO, right? You would have to have in your leadership in your company would have to have a high level of deliberately developed organization goals or track versus a non DDO, a non deliberately developed organization with a low EQ or a low emotional intelligence. which would be more like a deficit-based organization versus an asset-based organization. So we're looking at two sides of the organization. Um, but again, that's what I look at. And I also sort of reflect back on my own experiences. So working for the same company, but working for different, say, business units, you're going to get a gamut of, oh, they work high over here, or oh, it's low over here, or let me learn this landscape, right? High or low. And the other thing this reminds me of is office politics, right? Um, yeah, it comes into play because um, people will say, "Oh, I don't play politics." No, you play. You just either you are a part of the politicking or you're not. But either way, you're still being politicked. You can join in or you can't. So you can have a passive role or you can have an assertive role in it. But you're going to politic one way or the other in the organization. And I hope I'm not getting too far off base here. But when I think about emotional intelligence and working in organizations um, and working across business units, you're going to get the gamut, right? And so it really does come down to the leadership and the vision of that leader, of what you're going to experience. And so when I talk about landscape, I'm talking about learning the politics of that business, of that organization. And there's organizations within organizations, if that makes sense, right? And they're not all going to operate on that same landscape. And so you really have to learn it. And so, again, self awareness, emotional intelligence also all plays a role in how that's navigated and where you pivot and where you learn to pivot. These are the things that when I talk about transparent, this is what I went through and like what I had to walk through and learn to even get to the place that I am, right? And learning in difficult conversations, in difficult situations, in difficult landscapes, how to pivot and how to keep that, let's say, um, we'll say, high level of emotional intelligence to even protect yourself. Sometimes in organizations, you have to do this. You have to play safe, and it again. It to me, emotional intelligence runs across all of that.
Yeah, no,
Aware,
I can see how that is.
yeah. And I hope that I'm breaking it down. We're talking about organizations and what they're trying to solve. But when you're in an organization, there's so many dynamics. It's a landscape, and you really have to learn how to navigate it and pivot in it. Um,
I think that's what drew me to the field in the first place is it is so complex. There's so many things going on and I want to make sense of it. I think that it's really really fascinating, especially having worked in a number of different. You've worked in the same place for the last 20 years. I've worked in a dozen different places in the past 20 years. And so I've seen a lot of different cultures, a lot of different organizations, how they cope with things, how they do things. And you're right. Organizations that do it well tend to have this strong emotional intelligent aspect to it. As you were describing earlier the attributes of the low emotional intelligent leader, the
mhm.
first thing that popped into my head was this sounds like a toxic work environment, and then that's exactly what you said later on. And I think that the one leads into the other, and possibly it's a feedback loop. Do you think?
Yeah, it is. And I will say, when you just said it struck a chord, I've worked in many organizations and you've worked in the same one. Remember what I said. I've worked for the same corporation, but I've worked for multiple business units. And across those many or those business units, it's like its own culture, its own
Okay.
organization, right? So yeah, I've worked for the company, but I've worked across all of these strategic business units that operate differently. I've worked in different, so I've worked in the function in procurement, I've worked in the function of supply chain, I've worked in the function of corporate tax, and now I'm working in a actual business, right? So on the commercial side, I work and I sit in the business and I work for the business. Landscape totally different than when it's operational. So yes, same company, but different operating structures, if you get what I mean. And that's what I mean. Like, you got to learn the landscape. Yeah, the basic rules are the same, right? I get my paycheck from the same place. And I get the same sort of employee benefits per se, right? Those are staple. But when I walk and I go in these different functions, and I'm bringing Camisha that I worked for in supply chain in 2007. That's not going to cut it over here in the commercial side in this business, right? So the level of knowing landscape, right? And it gets back to knowing landscape, knowing, and that's emotional intelligence, that's self-awareness. All of it is just a big loop, like you just said. But just think, organizations, corporations have organizations inside that operate in these silos, right? So you're getting different experiences everywhere you go, Jake, and that is what I've experienced. And being able to take that, and that's why I say pivot along with this learning of emotional intelligence and what it means and what it looks like. Um, it really comes down to self-awareness. It really does. And what's happening, right? So I can walk into um, any job, any role, any organization, and say something is happening or there's an issue that I need to solve, I can look at it and say, oh, I recognize that. That happened to me over here. And let me tell you, that's not going to happen here because I know how to now not react, but respond, right? So having that proactive mindset, having a listening ear and not always, and this is what emotional intelligence is. I don't know if we got into the definition of it. For me, is not necessarily, and I think I said this in my table talk, and I knew I was going to bring this up, but not listening to respond, listening to understand. Take that pause and take that quiet, and that's where you build that emotional intelligence in that silence. Because does it require an answer? Does it require a response? Is the person that you're engaging with even looking for a response, or are they just looking for an active listener? And that is what emotional intelligence outside of self-awareness is built out of. And that's what I've had to build it out of. So this is an individual definition. I don't know that I can find it in the research, but it's mine, and I know that it's at play here for me for sure.
So you keep saying the word pivot, and that makes me think of like one of the qualities of a really strong organization is that they are adaptive. And so I think that we can see kind of a line drawn between the individuals who have high emotional intelligence and the adaptiveness of their organizations.
Absolutely. Um, So 4 years ago, I moved into this new role. The role was a newly created role that I was going to be great for, right? And so I left my comfort zone, and I moved over into the role, and I brought all of what I thought I knew and all of what I thought I needed. And the landscape was totally different, right? It was post COVID, it was being in a new location, in a new role in the business, not in the function. So, not operating out of the same guardrails. And I had a conversation with a mentor that told me, find out what your job is, find out what you're supposed to do. And I said, okay, I'm doing all of that. But what I found, Jake, was the power of the pivot. And I'm going to write a book, and I think it's going to be called The Power of the Pivot. And I love how you said change in there, and change as an overarching element of self-awareness, and having that power to pivot even in the middle of angst and the middle of, why am I blowing up back
I
here?
don't know. That was very exciting.
Wow. Wow.
Is there a key word that your
No,
tablet?
but thank you to whatever that was. If
It
that
looked
was
epic.
fiction, that was really great, right? So let me pause and take a step back. Um, but yeah, I really learned the power of pivoting, and I talked about this earlier, like that active listening. Always, and not always what people are saying is to you or for you or against you. It is just being said, right? So I don't need to internalize that. I can pivot away from that. And having that power and moving and knowing my landscape. Yeah, I might have messed up and did something that felt bad at that moment in that day, but I'm not carrying that with me week 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm leaving that. I'm pivoting on to the next thing. And when you have the wherewithal to do that, the way things open for you um, will just become immense, like just so much more. And there's so much learning and growth in pivoting and moving away from what doesn't feel natural.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You have to, what do you say, come up with your own path, and that's hard to find. But this is one key to getting there. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing that you said earlier was something about the silos and maybe the glue that puts the organization together. Would emotional intelligence have an effect, like a cohesiveness effect, on maybe a large organization that has multiple different silos?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you're going to have people and humans, right? So we're all still dealing with a human element. So at the end of the day, period, we're human. So you're having that human element. So there's always going to be a one or two that you can reach across to. So which manager, which approach is going to work on which manager. So me, I'm manager heavy. I got three managers. I got a manager who's got a manager who's got a manager, right?
Been
And so
there.
yeah, right. So it feels really heavy, but it also provides options, right? So if I can't talk to my manager, I can go talk to her manager. If her manager, I can go talk to her manager, right? And that has happened real world in my life, in my career. I mean, right now that's happened where I've had to say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I don't know if you know what I'm doing, but I want you to know what I'm doing. And I want to have a conversation with you about what I'm doing. And that shows up as, yeah, what could I do for you? What's your next move? What are you doing? And that shows up as, hey, I'm not really asking you for anything. I just want you to know what I'm doing. But if the opportunity comes, here's, 1, 2, 3 things that I would love to do, right? And I went to the senior VP of our group and I said, hey, I want to do something with change. And she's like, we don't have anything like that. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to show you we do. Like, yeah, we do. You just
Love
don't,
it.
right? I want to do something, and guess what I'm doing? Something with change.
Perfect.
So we had acquisition last year, and we've had opportunities to do training across the pond. I'm sticking my hand up for that. That's change, right? It doesn't say that, oh, I want to be doctor, of organization development change in this company. But the change happened and somebody has to manage the change in these silos. And so, hey, let me do that. And then I can show you, like, here's what I did to manage the change that you said we don't have.
You'll meet people, and they're really assertive, which is kind of what you're talking about. This is what I want. I'm going to do what I can to make what I want happen. And when they're high EQ, like what you're talking about, that can be a really positive experience for the individual and for everybody else with them. When they're low, that can be a really bad experience for everybody involved.
Absolutely. And that's the intersection. I think we talk about psychological safety, which is a theme in our cohort for whatever reason. It's is it cultural intelligence, emotional intelligence, and psychological safety? Is it those three? I couldn't think of cultural intelligence for some reason earlier when I was speaking, but that's our intersection, right? It's the psychological safety, and emotional intelligence is just that mechanism that creates um, the psychological safety. So it doesn't come from policies. It doesn't come from what we say we're going to do or how we feel. Oh, Jake, you're psychological safe because I said it. No, it comes from everyday micro interactions. How leaders respond to dissent, how mistakes get handled, who gets heard and who doesn't get heard. That's creating psychological safety, right? It's the micro moments. It's not, I'm telling you, it's created. It's not something that can be said. And so that's what that reminds me of.
How do you see that intersection between psychological safety and emotional intelligence, and how do they play off of each other?
Okay. I think so in our DODC,
Maybe
um,
first,
mhm.
just for our audience, give me a quick definition of psychological safety
Okay.
as you see it, and then talk about that intersection.
I think again, for me, psychological safety is defined by the micro interactions that we have with our groups, with our teams, and our organizations uh, that give a voice to the voiceless or those that may not have per se authority to have a voice in a topic, in a decision, in the way in which the organization may move. But psychological safety gives that approval that says, hey, I may not be the final decision maker, but I can still contribute. I can still add value. And here's how I do it. I feel safe enough to do that. And I feel like I'm in an organization that allows me to do that. So I think that's my definition. And it's not a research definition, it's just like what I feel like psychological safety in an environment does in an organization.
Yeah, so I feel like I can contribute, even contribute at risk. I'm gonna maybe say something that might cast a shadow on something that you've worked on, but if I'm aware of its weaknesses, then that's my responsibility to do that. And in a psychological safety environment, I would have no fear of retribution or humiliation or anything like that. I know that I can just talk and I can be open about that.
A safe space, right? If it's with your manager, another colleague,
Yeah, and I
or
and I I actually want to draw a line between safe space though, because a safe space is where nobody's getting offended,
oh yeah, that's
and
true.
in psychological safety, no, we're offending each other because we're calling out each other's, where are the problems, where are the weaknesses, what needs to improve, what needs to change, and sometimes that can be really hard for me to hear, but it's necessary, especially if I have power, if I'm a boss. I need
Yes,
to be able to listen to these kinds of criticisms without getting offended or reacting in any kind of way. And so I think that, with that established, the link to emotional intelligence is fairly plain.
I agree. I think the link to when you talk about emotional intelligence, that is the mechanism that creates psychological safety. So think about that.
Oh, I like that. So it's the
Mhm.
foundation of what we're gonna
It's the
establish.
it is the foundation. It is, and I think emotional intelligence also enables people, individuals, leaders, to stay open and to stay out of that defensive space, right? Also, like you mentioned, you're getting diverse or multiple perspectives on a topic, on a subject, and then you're also managing power dynamics thoughtfully. So, in that psychological safe place, it becomes like a slogan, and it also becomes a lived experience. So it's both. It's all of those things wrapped together.
So where we were talking before that maybe a toxic work culture and low emotional intelligence is a negative feedback loop.
Yeah.
Having that psychological safety element and high emotional intelligence would be its own feedback loop, but in this case, it's in enforcing the positive qualities and the positive behaviors.
It is, and it's giving. Stay away from my safe space. It's giving a psychologically safe um, mechanism where people can operate, and they feel, this is something that I'm living right now. This is something um, where if I make a mistake, I'm not going to be judged or I'm not going to be outcast because of it. Oh, I really like the way you said risk, because it reminded me of in my last functional role, we were given risk. So my role in procurement obviously is always to mitigate risk, right? So that we won't be sued, so that we'll be indemnified. If something happens, we're going to be made whole. We were given a task to make decisions and to for risk, right? Because there's always risk when you're doing work, right? Commercial work, there's risk, and when you're buying stuff, right? So you buy a roof, and you got to get the roofer. The problems with the risk that's involved there. But what I'm trying to say is, it depends on the level of risk, right? So is it a leaf decision? Is it a branch decision? Is it a root decision? And so the levels of risk that you're taking, do you need to get other people involved? So for a leaf decision, I can make a leaf decision, right? It's
A
think of
leaf
a tree.
decision?
Yeah, like think of a
Oh,
tree.
oh, like just you.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So just me. So a tree. So the analogy is of a tree, and it has branches and it has leaves and it's rooted, right? So a leaf and a branch, that's sort of a low risk, right? When you start getting to the tree and the root, those are bigger decisions. And so I might need to bring in somebody to help me. So it's a way to measure the risk. Um, and I think psychological safety goes hand in hand with risk. That's just what it reminded me of when you said that, because there's so many levels of risk that we look at. But I think psychological safety, and when we talk about those everyday micro interactions, we also have to think of the level and the limits of risk that we're taking when we're when we're staying open, and listening to our colleagues and listening to what the organization, and keeping your ear to the floor to kind of see what's happening.
No, that's so helpful. Another follow-up question I want to ask, if you don't mind, you were talking about like the specific practices that might be associated with high emotional intelligence, and the one that you mentioned was, pausing and listening.
Mm-hmm.
What other practices are associated with high emotional intelligence?
Well, I like, so I'll go back to my table talk, and I thought this would come up um, when we talk about being in the dance or being in the balcony. So being on the dance floor, being in the balcony, um, the pause, right? We talk about the pause. So 2 and 2, take 2 seconds to listen and 2 seconds to pause before you say your next thing. So it's a mindset, it's a behavior that you're training yourself. Being in the balcony, I can look down on the dance floor and I can judge you and say, oh, Camisha missed a step. Oh, I'm judging everything because I'm up high. I'm in the balcony. I'm untouchable up here, but I can look down on the dance floor and I can see all the mistakes that everybody is making. Oh, they stepped over trash. Oh, that's a safety risk. Oh, there's a cord. Oh, they're going to trip. I'm in the balcony. I can do, I'm high. I'm up here and you're down there. However, when I get down in the dance floor, I can then say, oh, wow, I see why, they missed a step. Or I see why there's a chord there because now I'm in the dance. I'm doing the same thing they're doing. I'm working on the same level. And now I can understand. Just think of a manufacturing facility, right? And we're producing, I don't know, Post-its on the manufacturing floor. I'm in the dance here. And I got a time limit and I got to get, there we go, Post-its. Now we're branding DODC for BGSU. Student Jake Patterson and Camisha Mills would like a deal. Thank you. So we're in the dance. We're making these and we got to get, production out. We need to make 1,000,000 of these tonight. I'm not thinking about the cord on the floor. I'm not thinking about the step I missed because I'm thinking about my production and what my number says at the end of the night. I'm in the dance now. I'm on the floor. I'm on the line. I got to get this done. I'm not thinking about the other, maybe safety risk or risk that I'm even taking with my own life, because I'm just in the moment. I'm doing what I need to do in the moment. But in the balcony, I can sit up there and judge you. But in the dance floor, I can't do that because I'm down here with you. And so that's a mindset. And that's when I talk about, so the mindsets of being in the dance, being on the dance floor, taking that time to pause. Those are all what we call M&B, mindsets and behaviors. And that's also another way to increase your emotional intelligence and your self-awareness, going back to the original definition like we gave, because I think that is sort of the bread and butter of EQ.
Right. So if
Awareness.
I'm on the balcony, maybe I have a clearer view of things. I'm at less risk, but I'm also not making a difference down there.
Not, you're not in the dance. No, you can only sit up there and make judgments, and and judge from afar. Yeah, you can observe, and yeah, maybe you could see the bigger picture. Like, oh, we got some safety risk. Oh, we have some missteps. Oh, we have wasted inventory. Oh, we're wasting too many of those back pages. We need these. But I see, thousands of them on the floor. Right? I'm just judging you because I'm up there. But come down in the dance floor, get in the dance, see how you're sweating, see how you're moving, and see how you last. Right?
And that's really where things get real, because now those skills, if I don't have them, I'm going to miss my dance steps. And now people up on the balcony can judge me, because where I used to be judging others.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Now you're down and you're like, oh, now I see why. I don't care about, tens of these on the floor. I care about the bigger picture, which is my production number at the end of the night or the end of the month or the end of the week or the quarter, whatever it is.
I like that imagery. I think that it has a lot of application. When you look at emotional intelligence, and you think of it as, obviously it's making a difference in the organization, but it's also an individual quality, and it kind of has to be, a number of different individuals all committing to the same skill and developing themselves and becoming this. So my question is, as we're looking at that societally, are some people naturally better at it than others? And can people, maybe with low empathy or high disagreeableness, develop strong emotional intelligence?
That's a good question, Jake. I think so. I think there has to be a willingness to guide yourself towards a higher level. I think I mentioned it earlier. When the responses around you become the same, right? Or the same instances keep occurring, or there's a cycle or a pattern of you're getting the same feedback, then that's when it's time to not say internalize, but maybe take an internal look, a look at yourself, a self awareness. There's a level of self awareness that really has to be present to move EQ forward for a person, in my opinion. So, absolutely, it can be learned. But what if you don't know about it? What if you never heard about this thing called emotional intelligence and you're just operating out of, what is it, fight or flight? So we all have that naturally. Um, and I think emotional intelligence is that peanut butter and jelly in the middle, right? So you got two slices of bread and then you got peanut butter and jelly. And I think EQ is that. Right? So we're at fight or flight over here, two slices of bread in the middle is peanut butter and jelly. And do we want to get to the peanut butter and jelly? Yeah, we do. But to do that, we got to take a bite out of each side of the bread to get the middle. And so that's just an analogy I'm giving. I don't know where that came
No, I
from.
like that analogy. I think that has a lot of application in different fields. I'm gonna use that from now on.
Thank you. I hope you give me credit too. Um, I just really look at it like that. And absolutely, it can be developed. Um, what's your opinion? I don't know if I should be asking you that, but I really do think that there is an opportunity for it to be developed. Even with people like low empathy or highly disagreeable, or, there's always, I call them forecasters. They can see in the future. So if you do this, this is going to happen. I love people like that because they can kind of see it, but that may also bring a negative connotation to that person. Like, oh, let's wait for, Kimberly, because she's going to know what's going to happen in the future. And I like that, but I think building emotional intelligence through reflection, and I go back to my peanut butter and jelly analogy, right? Two slices of bread, peanut butter and jelly in the middle. Reflecting until you get to that sweet part. Um, Feedback, and I think you mentioned that earlier, in the difference in safe space and psychological safety. But the feedback, right? Being able to take the criticism, but in a positive light, and using it to pivot or to change. So, um, exposure, excuse me, um, building emotional intelligence through exposure to diverse topics and concepts, right? And then also coaching, and then intentional development, which all goes back to um, self awareness.
I think that concept of reflection, self-reflection, becomes really, really critical because if nothing else, right? If a person is has the personality that makes them less likely to develop emotional intelligence, I think what
Mm-hmm.
that really is that they're less likely to self-reflect, right?
Absolutely.
A person that I brought up, high disagreeableness, which is I'm going to be assertive. I'm going to step forward. I'm going to say this is what I think. Well, there's a bit of self-assuredness that comes with that. And if I'm self-assured when it comes to the business decisions that I'm making or the career path that I want to make for myself, I could be self-assured in my perception of the world as well. In fact,
Yeah.
guaranteed that's the case. And so that might make somebody less likely to be open to self-reflection. Anyway, I think that you're right. Anybody can learn these things. Your point earlier that self-reflection really is that key. I think that really speaks to where we find people with low emotional intelligence.
Yeah. I will also add, I don't think it's a trait. EQ is not a trait. Um, I like this statement. It's a capability shaped by environment, experience, and intention. And it is. It really is. And it that goes back to everything that I've sort of said already. It's your environment, your ability to pivot, your experience or your intention, your ability to pivot out of whatever the situation may not be having a return on investment, right? So we talked about ROI, like what's your intention, your experiences. When I talked about, oh, no, I've seen that before. I'm not going down that road. I'm pivoting over here. So my experience teaches me. Um, and then your environment, like, so who are you around? Our parents always say this, right? Or as a parent and as being someone who was parented, um, oh, don't hang around, those people across the street. You're gonna end up just like them, right? Or don't do this, or what's the thing, two bad apples, you're just in the group with whatever that group is going or wherever they're doing, you're associated with that. So your environment also really plays a part. They say look at the two or three people around you, and that'll tell you where you're going.
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, if I'm in an organization that values emotional intelligence and that has a lot of emotional intelligent models for me to watch and admire, I am more likely to get on board and to adopt those traits. Even if I don't understand the concept, I'm going to be seeing the benefits. I'm going to be trying to make myself better in that way.
That's right. Mindsets and behaviors, knowing your landscape, having the ability to have people come in and talk to you about emotional intelligence. Because I know where I work, we've had workshops where people come in and talk about EQ and emotional intelligence and what it is and what it looks like. And sort of the triggers, because there are triggers that you can have, whether it's a personal or professional trigger, it's still a trigger that will trigger a response. And so I think emotional intelligence tells us, you don't need to respond to that. You need to um, wait or pause, take a step. Um, because when you start operating out of that innate fight or flight, you want to respond, and it's not always beneficial yourself, the organization, or the team that you're trying to collaborate with or for or to.
For sure. So let's talk about leadership again. We know that emotional intelligence benefits leadership. Okay, so if I'm in leadership and I need to make a really difficult decision,
Okay.
okay, maybe it's something that I need to make without emotions.
Yeah.
How do I balance that?
Ooh, I love that question. And let's see. I think individuals or cultural patterns within the organization with high EQ respond with awareness, right? And impact to its stakeholders, what that looks like. So even when you're challenged, not being diminished, right? Or being seen, but also held to a high standard, or speaking and knowing that it matters. I think those are high emotional intelligence leaders that can respond positively or make an offer in a situation where the news is bad, but there's also, I still have something left for you. Compassion, empathy. I understand where you are, or I understand how this may feel. So showing that compassion. Or I've been in your seat before, Jake, and this is how I did. This is what I did, right? So anytime a leader with high emotional intelligence has to make a decision that impacts their team, their organization, I think showing up authentic, showing up with empathy, and then showing up with a listening ear, and then also um, showing up and having awareness of how it's going to impact that person. And so I think creating, and I'm going back to psychological safety and air quotes, because I think it all works hand in hand for a highly intelligent, emotionally intelligent leader.
Can a whole organization be emotionally intelligent?
Absolutely. Yes, they can. I mean, you're gonna have some offliers no matter where you go. I mean, you
Sure.
can't you can't change everybody, but I will say in organizations, what is it? It's like you got 20% high performers, you got 60%. So 60% is average, right? That's where everybody sits in this average organization, right? We're all doing the same thing. We're all following the lead of the organization, the vision of the organization.
You're
And
thinking of
so,
the bell curve, right? So most
yeah,
people are right around the average.
yeah. So most people are following that wave. And then you got those down at the bottom. No matter what you do, they're not going. They don't care. They're not going. You can say whatever you want to say. They have their own mindset. It's not a part of their job description. They didn't sign up for it. They'll even go pull out their job description and say, yeah, it doesn't say I need to be emotional intelligent on here. It just shows that I need to do this and that and that. And emotional intelligence is not on there. So yeah, no, I'm not going. Right? I'm not going. And so you're always going to have that. And that's what we call, I will say those are our deficit people, right? I'm gonna call those deficit people down here in this 20%. And then these the 60%, again, they're just gonna I'm gonna say like 40% is just gonna go to get along to go along. So they're gonna just go. And then that 20% in that average, um, they're really interested in learning or gauging or improving or reflecting. And then the top 20%. those are your emergent talent, your standouts, your next board members. They're all at the top, right? They're already pegged to be the next VP of manufacturing or operations or whatever it is whatever they uh, aspire to. But yeah, absolutely. I think also it kind of goes back. Um, if individuals are nodes, then the culture is the pattern, right? So, talking about making decisions that impact across stakeholders, leaders modeling reflection and accountability, that all goes into an organization having high emotional intelligence. Um, and what does it feel like to work there? Challenged but not diminished. You're seen and you have high standards. You can speak and you know it matters. So just going back to what I said before.
Well, that's good. Well, this is an area that I haven't researched very much, and other than talking to you, it's not something that I know a lot about, and so this has been really good for me to hear, and
Yes.
hopefully anybody else that watches this, it's going to be educational. It's going to be really inspiring to hear
Yeah.
about.
I,
Um, we may need to get together and have another conversation about cultural
I,
intelligence.
I would love
I,
to.
I think you could talk about that all day.
I could talk about that all day, and I will start my caveat by saying emotional intelligence, it's not a personality trait. I think we talked about that. It is measurable, it's developable. Develop You can develop. It's a capability tied to leadership effectiveness and dynamics in relationships and organizational performance. But what DODC does with the systems lens, it connects emotional intelligence to cultural intelligence, psychological safety, and then the conditions that either enable or suppress emotionally intelligent behavior. So that's my end cap. I wanted to make that difference, so I'm glad you brought that out. Um, and I would love to, and then just put them side by side. Because cultural intelligence, that's, I'm going to take Brandy's, that's my jam, right? Because that is my jam, and that is equity, inclusion, knowing um, norms and mores of societies, and then blending that with work and organization. So I love cultural intelligence. Totally separate CQ from EQ, but I think you cannot drive CQ without first looking at your EQ. So looking at your emotional intelligence, and then psychological safety is right in the middle, right? So you got cultural as your bread over here, emotional intelligence is your bread over there, and then maybe psychological safety in the middle is your peanut butter and jelly. So we can use that analogy too. So we got air quotes, we got psychological safety, um, and we got peanut butter and jelly. So we got jam.
Nice.
Nice.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. Camisha
You're
has been
welcome.
great, and I'll look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you for the opportunity.